Hi, welcome to the committee program post May Day Spectacular. We wanted to get our shit together for May Day. We didn't, and so now the spectacular has moved to a week later. But making it extra spectacular is the return of the Cross-Atlantic Crosstalk gang. That is Ellie Mae O'Hagan, the director of the Class think tank in the UK, and the show's own deputy director, Julia Doubleday. Hello to you both.
Hi.
I've only just noticed how bizarre your desk is. That's a toucan.
You just noticed
one
that?
Of those...
It's a puffin. He's had it.
That's Oscar.
Forever.
He smells of the sea.
Is that a real puffin?
It's a real taxidermied puffin. Yes, he's from Iceland.
He bought it in duty free.
While under the influence of the drug Ambien, which we were speaking of earlier. Yeah. So I don't remember much. I was coming home from Finland, and 2 weeks later, Oscar arrived home from Finland, and we've been inseparable ever since.
That's beautiful.
And I get him if Arun dies. It's already been discussed.
That's right. My children have
Well,
abjectly said they
about this.
do not want the puffin. They do not like Oscar. They do not want to talk about Oscar. They don't like it.
To be fair, the odds that Arun actually has a will are, I'm going to say 0. So it's going to be a mad grab.
If you are a lawyer who wants to help me put together a will for free or for cheap, please get in touch with the show program at committee.org. And you need to do that in the next 3 years. Thank you. Appreciate you. So actually, I want to take advantage of having you here, Ellie, to ask you to help us make sense of to help us make sense of the British local elections. I mean, look, I will say on the surface, we all saw that certainly London flipped some old-timey seats, like Margaret Thatcher's favorite seat, over to Labour. Other places we saw the Tories get blunted by the Greens and by the Lib Dems. What was your take on the shape of the night, especially considering the pressures, both criminal and otherwise, that Boris Johnson and the Tories find themselves under? How did you think the night went?
So in terms of Boris Johnson and all of the stuff that he's been doing, I think that actually hasn't been good for Labour because I think that people's attitude is not, I have to vote Labour because the Conservatives are really bad. Sorry, the cat.
No, it's all good.
That again?
Yeah. No, you're good. Continue.
Okay. What was I saying? Yeah, I don't think that people are like, the Conservatives are really bad, so I have to vote Labour. I think they're basically, people are like, politicians are all the same. And I think that will depress turnout at elections. I mean, I haven't looked at turnout for these local elections, but it's always quite low. And I think that will actually ironically harm Labour. Having said that, the Tories did do pretty badly in these elections. And I think that has to be traced back to like various things, not just Partygate, but the cost of living crisis, the scandal about Rishi Sunak avoiding tax, all of this stuff. And I think what I'm worried about is that Labour did really well in London. Just to say that not all seats in the UK were contested either, so there's just lots of places that didn't have an election. But Labour did really well in London. It won Wandsworth Council, Westminster Council, which has been Tory since 1964, and Barnet Council, which is an absolutely dreadful council under the Tories. So that's good. But elsewhere, I don't think it really, Labour really had the performance that it needed to in order to feel confident about its strategy. Because basically Labour's strategy at the moment is alienate their entire voting coalition in order to attract what I think in America you would call the Rust Belt voters.
Yeah, we're very familiar with this as a strategy as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I would be, I don't know how they're feeling, but if I was them, I would be worried about that strategy because I think that actually the sort of electoral trends in this country, which I think are created by demographic change and economics, but the electoral trends in this country is that cities are getting more and more progressive, and the kind of sometimes the commuter belt, so the sort of outer ring of the city, is because people are being displaced out, so they have to kind of travel in. That's getting more progressive. but rural areas and towns are becoming less and less progressive. And I think that's largely because young people don't stay in them because there's not as many jobs. And I don't think I've seen anything in this election that shows that Labour has managed to reverse that trend or kind of deal with that trend in any way. And I think it's still going, that trend, in spite of them sort of burning lots of bridges in order to attract these kind of voters in rural areas and towns.
I mean, very specifically, they did not get these voters, right? Places like Hartlepool, like kind of backslid, or folks were saying that, you know, that they're actually got fewer votes in these communities than Jeremy Corbyn did in 2018. So I think you could argue that these voters who you're saying they're burning all this political capital to get, they didn't even manage to get any of them. So it really does seem like a futile exercise.
Yeah, like they did make gains in some places. I can't remember which ones, but they did, like Cumberland, although that's a new council, but they won that. And
you feel like that's representative of this sort of, you know, former kind of red wallish working class description? Yeah, I would say. And then also, like, I mean, I'm sorry, I can't remember all. There's been so many seats that I've And you all name them crazy things, so we understand, yeah.
Yeah. But, like, for example, Sheffield. So Sheffield was, that's a northern, it's like I can't think of an American equivalent of Sheffield for your listeners, but for your viewers, but basically it's like, it's a former, like, where there's been like a town with a strong working class identity, and there's like a lot of former mining communities there, and it's kind of semi-rural, so it's on the borders of a national park. And Sheffield was a target seat for Labour. So what that will mean is that they spent more on ads there, they flooded it with canvassers and popular MPs or well-known MPs, and they didn't win it, which I think is kind of worrying. So yeah, I think they did have quite a good election, Labour, but I don't think they've done enough to justify their strategy. I think their strategy is quite high risk. I don't really understand it. I don't understand their rationale, and I think these elections suggest that it's not paying off necessarily.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, but I think it's also these kind of results that are kind of blech, neither here nor there, also don't have people asking tough questions of the strategy of leadership. Like, no one's really going to be asking Keir Starmer, I think, tough questions about this, although I could be wrong. Maybe you all are more analytical than we are in the U.S. about these things. But, I mean, we see the hangover of our last few elections, and sort of now we have a trend on TV where it's a cool contrarian thing to say to be Democrats are going to do bad in midterms as we think they are, which is a lie. That is not true. They are going to do extremely poorly. Would you agree, Julia Doubleday?
Yeah, I also think that trend maybe died down a little bit in recent weeks. Like, that was definitely a thing I was hearing from, I think, mostly from operatives. I think to a degree, I'm not sure those people even believe that. It's more of a just like try to control the narrative thing, or it's a denial thing. But yeah, I don't see any way that the Democrats can come back from the place they're in. Roe v. Wade actually could be something of a motivator to get the Democrats out, for sure. So I mean, if anything, that, as horrific as it is in terms of electorally, it may save their ass in the midterms. But I'm not convinced that that's even enough, because I think for a lot of people, they feel like this is horrific. The Democrats have every branch of government and they're doing nothing. So why is that motivating me to come out and vote Democrat? Now, the boomers who have just been buying this bullshit for decades, that's not their perspective. They're like, well, we just have to get out and vote harder. But for younger people, we know that they could end the filibuster tomorrow. We know that they could encode Roe v. Wade into law tomorrow. They're choosing.
Obama promised to do it in 2008.
Obama promised to do it in 2008, and he had a supermajority, and he had the ability to do it. Yeah. And then he said, I'd rather focus on things that aren't so controversial. So that's why we are where we are. The Democrats have been fundraising on they're going to take away your right to choose for decades. And in the meantime, anytime they had power, they never took the steps necessary to encode it into law. They never did what they said that they would do. And so it can go either way. On the one hand, like, yes, older voters who are, and people who are just desperate to pull out the stops to do whatever they can to stop this from happening, which I definitely empathize with, are going to come out and vote for Democrats. But there's a lot of other people that feel like, you've lied to us so many times, you have the power to do it, show us that you're going to do it, or go fuck yourself. Because you know, right now there's basically 2 votes holding up killing the filibuster, according to what we know. There may be other people hiding behind
there's 2 or 3
votes
behind them, I think, who enjoy not having to answer.
So with Manchin and Sinema, it's like, well, what can we possibly do about Manchin and Sinema? The entire weight of the party should be on them. Nobody's even pressuring them. Biden literally a couple days ago said he doesn't want to comment on the filibuster. I mean, can you imagine the inverse case where you know, some Republican is holding up Trump's agenda with their 1 vote? Trump would be on Fox News 24 hours a day calling this guy a loser, pervert.
He'd be in their district as well, right? He'd be working
in their district. Yeah. He would be picking their opponent. He would be like, you're out because I have power in the party.
And when Bernie did that to Manchin, all the Democrats pressured him to cut it out, which was, I thought, also extremely lame.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We also know that the Republicans are going just no holds barred against Madison Cawthorn for a comment he made about how he's been invited to cocaine orgies by the Republicans. Ever since he made that comment, everyone was kind of like, he wants a lot of attention, who knows? But ever since he made that comment, there's been constant drip releases of incriminating.
Yeah, he's in trouble.
He's in trouble. I mean, they released a bunch of like very fucking weird, I personally think it's fratty shit, but like sexually inappropriate fratty shit.
People just trying to embarrass him and hurt him because he like went against the party. But it's true, right? There's consequences.
It just goes to show like there are things the party can do. And I happen to know that when you run, the party asks for a self-oppo file on yourself. Collect everything that we could find so that we know what we're going to be dealing with if this comes up. I call it the self-blackmail file. No, I'm not going to ever fucking do that for the D-Trip, because if they have that information, they completely control you. So
you also saw what can happen with that information when J.D. Vance's campaign by accidentally put it in a file dump with a bunch of other things that they made public, thereby making their own opposition file public, which is definitely not smart politics.
Well, that also happened with the WikiLeaks. In Hillary's emails, there was specifically an email that had a document attached that was all of the things Clinton said in closed-door private speeches that would be bad if they got out, and they put them all in one place in one document. And it's like, you guys are stupid.
What kind
Why
of
would
things?
you do that?
Like
just making promises to donors to donors,
basically
saying,
economically regressive stuff, right? Like promises to shareholders.
Well, no, and also saying like, yeah, like we may have one position in public and one in private that's different. You know, like we may say we're for these social policies, but like don't worry about it. Essentially, like that's not going to happen. Also making derogatory comments about environmentalists and talking about how they just need to get a life, and so just a bunch of stuff that is exactly who I think Hillary Clinton is as a person. But for the propagandized masses who consume a really happy feminist icon version of her, that would be very out of step with their idea of what Hillary Clinton is, which is not a power-hungry sociopath.
I will say, talking about repro again, just really quick, and we actually talk about it later in the show, but Liz Winstead was supposed to come on the show today to talk about it. Nothing to do with the Roe v. Wade case, just because it was so it's been so bad in America, and even with Roe v. Wade in place, right? It was such a symbolic thing for Democrats, because actually the power that Republicans have to stop people from having abortions is at the state level. Is the parking lot in a clinic isn't big enough, right? Like it's a death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not like Americans had access to abortion to begin with. I mean, Ellie, when you look at this from the outside, I mean, does this seem shocking, or it's just like, yeah, Americans are America-ing?
No, it was shocking. I'm in a WhatsApp group of like a bunch of my female friends, and we were all talking about it that day. It was like, it's just upsetting, isn't it, as a woman, wherever you are, like, to see the sort of world's biggest economy do something like that is like quite scary. And the Times newspaper wrote an editorial agreeing with the decision as well, which was kind of worrying. And in this country, I'm sure I've talked about it here before, we have this kind of anti-trans movement, like very lot of transphobia, and it's mainly coming from women who claim to be progressive, who say that trans people are a threat to women's rights. So it's not really coming from the extreme right as it is in the US or the Republican Party or evangelical Christians. It's coming from so-called feminists. But those feminists are in communication with, and in many cases being financially supported by, the same people in the US that are taking abortion away from the people who need it. And so I think there is a fear here that any gains made in kind of dismantling the rights of trans people will be sort of transferred over to also get rid of the right to abortion. So there's one specific example of this, which is called, I'm going to get it wrong here. It's called Gillick competence, and it's basically this sort of like understanding in the NHS about what you're allowed to consent to as a young person, and like where you're sort of seen as competent to be able to consent and where you're not. And so basically a lot of transphobes have been trying to say that young people are not able to consent to be given puberty blockers when they're transgender. But because they're questioning this law of Gillick competence, what that means is that any person under a certain age who wants an abortion might not be able to get one.
Totally.
So it does have these like knock-on effects. And I think that's what people are worried about here. But also, in Northern Ireland, there's a total ban on abortion still. And I don't think we talk about that enough in the UK. We often look at what America's doing, but we don't actually look at what our own country's doing. So, I mean, if Sinn Féin gets in the local elections, maybe that'll herald a change. But, I don't know whether that will come, like...
I mean, we did see the big yes campaign in the Republic of Ireland. I mean, it's so I think a lot of us feel like, oh, so Ireland's fine. The UK seems okay. We don't actually think of Northern Ireland as being as distinctive as it is. Actually, was something I hadn't even thought about.
Yeah, it's it's bad, but yeah, no, we were very like it's not been a good thing. Like it's good week for women here. I think there's been a lot of shock.
Is abortive care a normal part of the NHS? Do you have to go to a special division of the NHS, or do you just see is there any way that there is a sort of reproductive rights ghetto inside the NHS where it somehow is treated differently, or is it really truly just part of the system?
So I haven't had an abortion, but I have had a friend who has, and I went with her to get it done. And I think yeah, she was referred by her doctor, and then she just went to the NHS, and then she was given like a pill, and then you take it once, and then like 12 hours later you take another one, and then like it's sort of a chemical abortion. It creates and I think that was the that was within the NHS. But just to say that in this country, abortion is actually technically illegal. It's just there's exemptions based on mental health grounds or like safety grounds, and the culture is such that all abortions get granted really on mental health grounds. But technically it's not legal here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's been lots of campaigns to get it decriminalised, and I don't recall it being decriminalised. So I think that is still the case. But yeah, so I think you still have to have your abortion approved by 2 doctors here.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a funny area because we have quite late term abortions as well. So we have like 24 weeks is the cut-off point here, which like a tiny proportion of abortions happen that late. Like most of them are because there's something wrong and it's a matter of life and death. Most abortions happen like pretty quickly after the woman becomes pregnant. And And if you want one in this country, you can get one, like, without any problems. But it is strange that it's sort of matched up with this kind of, that it not being strictly legal, and that you needing 2 doctors to say, like,
they're still shining a light, and there's something sort of special and less desirable about this kind of medical attention in a way.
Yeah. And of course, there's like, we don't have an evangelical movement like in the US. Like, it's nothing like what you have, but like, it doesn't have as much money and power. It isn't really part of our political parties, but of course there are churches that do try and intervene. They provide counselling. Some of your anti-abortion protesters started picketing our clinics a few years ago, and at my doctor's surgery, I saw a kind of anti-abortion poster in the reception once, and I insisted that they take it down. So there is a bit of that, but I would be exaggerating if I said it was on the same level as the US, because it definitely
they're just tourists. These crazy evangelicals, they have their fetus jars with them wherever they go. They're going to Puerto Rico, they take it. They're going to Hawaii, they're going to London, whatever it is. They just,
Yeah, and the tiny, tiny plastic models of babies. That's like, they sort of show you that, and
it's no good.
Yeah,
it's no good.
Yeah.
Speaking of no good, Julia, and you tell me exactly the thing, but you texted me something that was sort of horrible. Maybe you tweeted it before. I don't know. But
I've been texting and tweeting so many horrible
No, I
things
know, but this
that
was the
to be a
simple
little more
math
specific.
where it was like, where it was people reevaluating the
Sure.
deaths, and it was like, actually, if you do the math, there's
Yes,
no
I
receding, there's no getting worse COVID.
I will
Okay, go
help
ahead.
you and all of the American people and the American press.
Yeah, simplify
understand
this.
what's
Make it as
actually
simple as you
happening
did in that thing.
with COVID, because unfortunately, our press has completely abdicated their responsibility to hold Biden accountable for this pandemic, and we are now arguably worse off than we were a year ago. So here's the reality. We just hit 1 million Americans dead of COVID. 1 million in 25 months. When I said that at least 1 million people would die of COVID, I was treated as crazy by every person. Nobody who called me crazy for that is going to come around and listen to me now. They're still going to call me crazy. But I was right, and Dr. Fauci's prediction, 100 to 200,000 max, was really fucking wrong. So if you look at these deaths, 400,000 people had died when Biden took office. The reason I specifically remember this is because Biden and Harris decided to have a
Mission accomplished party, yeah.
No, not a mission accomplished party, a maudlin crocodile tear ceremony on the mall the night before inauguration to honor
I forgot about that.
400,000 Americans that unnecessarily died under Trump because of his botched pandemic response. They all got up there, they all cried, and they all pretended to give a shit. And now we've hit 1 million deaths. You want to know how much they're acknowledging? Forget the fucking ceremony on the mall for the 600,000 people that they've killed. There's not even a mention of it on his Twitter anywhere. He did a public speech yesterday where he wanted to talk about inflation. We're in full-on pandemic denial mode. Like, hit the gas on that shit, because we have no fucking plan, and the press is helping them out every step of the way. So here are the numbers. 400,000 people died under Trump in 10 months, average of 40,000 people per month. Obviously, that goes up and down depending on where we are in the wave, but average 40,000 deaths per month. Biden has been in office for 15 months. 600,000 people have died. That's 40,000 people per month. Every single month of the pandemic, 40,000 people, 40,000
The
Americans
average doesn't
have
change.
died.
Yeah, that's what sort of, that's the...
Biden has not reduced deaths at all. It's not just that deaths didn't stop. They never changed. He has done nothing. And if you look at the vaccine resistance, which is another thing they're refusing to acknowledge, in Omicron, which they told us was mild, which was not mild. There is a new study out yesterday that is currently being peer reviewed that showed that Omicron is just as motherfucking deadly as the early variants. Now, how did it get labeled mild when there wasn't enough
really
time
stuck.
yet to study whether or not it was, because people wanted to believe it and because the entire press was pushing it. It really stuck, and where it came from was a bunch of journalists who didn't understand the data, who were comparing rates of hospitalizations with rates of cases that were happening on the same day, even though there's a 2-week gap between those numbers. So when you have cases on this day, they have no relationships to the hospitalizations or deaths that happen on the same day. They have a relationship to hospitalizations that happen 2 weeks later, and they have a relationship to deaths that happen 3 weeks later. Nobody at the New York Times can apparently understand this because they've been reporting it this way over and over again. They're still reporting it this way. Cases are going up, but hospitalizations are low. That means hospitalizations are decoupled from cases. This is a very, very basic error in interpreting this data. They've been doing it for months, and yet they're still getting treated like some sort of public health service that we should be going to. These are journalists. They're journalists, and they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. So that mild name that they put onto it, not only is it going to turn out that it wasn't just slightly less mild, it wasn't anything. It was just fucking COVID. And they are putting people in situations where they're incorrectly assessing their risk. So now let's move on to the vaccine resistance. In the Omicron wave, which they claimed was not going to be deadly, about 200,000 people have died of Omicron so far, an incredibly deadly wave. 40% of those deaths were vaccinated people. Now, the Washington Post finally did an expose about this week, and people were angry to see it. They were like, well, this doesn't account, this is oversampling bias. This doesn't account for the fact that so many more people are vaccinated. And it's like, yes, that's true. Read into the article and they talk about that. It doesn't mean the vaccine doesn't work at all. It means that you still have a 12 times more likely to be hospitalized or die if you're unvaccinated. So of course, get vaccinated. But if you think it's a fucking acceptable outcome, a fucking acceptable way to be with this pandemic where 200,000 people die in every wave and 40% of them are vaccinated, we're right back at fucking square one. We're not back to square one, actually. We're halfway there. And as we continue to drop every public protection, ignore every public health advice, as we continue to allow unmitigated spread, we are creating super variants that are becoming more and more and more vaccine resistant. So Delta was more vax resistant than Alpha, obviously. Omicron was more vax resistant than Delta. The new Omicron is more vax resistant than the last Omicron, and all of them are more contagious than the previous ones. So the pandemic is over. It's based on motherfucking nothing. It's based on nothing. And every time I try to talk to people about this, they look at me like I'm crazy because they've been so socialized to feel like it's over. But if you have a counter argument, go look at the numbers and explain to me what the fuck the counter argument is. Because I think the counter argument is I'm sick of it and I'm in denial. The reality
that's for sure the counter argument to it. It just happens to be more powerful than, in some ways we want to give it credit for, right?
The White House Correspondents' Dinner was last week, and we all said this is a super spreader event. They put 3,000 unmasked people in a crowded room.
I ain't going there. What are you talking about?
Fauci refused to go the same day that he said the pandemic phase was over because he knew it was good for him. Biden went, although he wouldn't stay for the dinner to try to reduce risk, although he was up there speaking with no mask on.
This is sort of airplane logic where you're like, it's okay as long as I'm drinking alcohol.
They're the people. They're the people who are supposed to be telling us what's going on with the pandemic. They're yucking it up with Joe Biden about how specifically they joked about how they're at a super spreader event.
I actually want to put a thing. I think it's worse than that in a way. Look, it's epidemiologically it can't be worse than you say. But I mean, the communications. It used to be, what are you going to do? Or we're doing everything. But the rise in openly hostile talking about other countries, specifically China, still wanting to pursue a zero COVID policy lockdown. Like, we see these insane articles. They're shooting people's dogs, like all these things. Like, Ellie, is that also happening? Or Julie, I mean, feel free to react. You know what I'm saying? But this is happening, right? Like, you see these articles.
I just want to finish. I want to finish my thought about White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is that they made a big deal about how they had tested everyone. First of all, the rapid tests don't work very well anymore. We know that. Secondly, they often don't work until 3 or 4 days into your symptoms. We know that as well. But they're, again, ignoring science, the thing they promised they weren't going to do. Then at the dinner itself, they said every single person was tested. They said that over and over again. And then somebody mentioned, well, the staff wasn't tested. All of the staff serving them the entire night, walking around, no masks between all the tables.
True?
They were Yes, they were never tested because, Arun, they're servants. They don't get tests. They're not human beings. So, really a great case of just fucking, I don't know, karma. Like, you didn't give these people tests. Now, obviously, as we expected, cases are popping up from all over the White House Correspondents' Dinner. We don't know if Biden got it. It's perfectly possible that he did, but if he didn't get it this time, he'll get it another time. You know, the entire press has now been exposed through this irresponsibility. And this is just the new normal, right? You know, at the dinner, they're joking about, you know, willingly being at a super spreader event. And it's like, okay, you're willingly there. The way they're covering it is, oh, that was their choice. They're willingly there. Are the workers willingly there, or do they just need to get paid? Are the families of workers who may be immunocompromised consenting to be, you know, infected by Kim Kardashian and her boyfriend? Like, no, this is not how public health works. None of these people who have to be around you consent to your bullshit lack of just being socially
responsible. Also, it just literally happened at the Gridiron dinner, which, Ellie, is another one of these stupid dinners that they have, like, you know, which was like last month, where everybody who was there got COVID, including Kamala Harris's husband and stuff. So it's
And the last thing, I promise this is the last thing, but the last thing I want to say about the Biden COVID response, along with now being in complete denial about the death rate, denial about the vaccine resistance, which is bringing us squarely back to the beginning of the pandemic, that we're destroying the effectiveness of the vaccine at a very, very rapid pace. Denial of long COVID. 10% of cases have long-term, even lifelong, debilitating effects. It affects every organ in your body, from your brain to your stomach to your heart. You can have a heart attack after you have it. You can have a stroke after you had it. All of these things are not things that happen with the flu, and they're not happening uncommonly. One study found that brain damage was noticed in 25% of people who had COVID of any severity. So don't you think it would be good to figure out whether that's an issue before we pursue a policy of forced mass infection? Not once, because you can get it again at the earliest 3 weeks, but generally around 3 months after you've had it, you can get it again. Do you think it's good to get a virus that gives you brain damage 3 times a year for the rest of your life? Do you think you're going to be doing well with that in 10 years when you've had it 30 times and you've never fully had time to recover from the damage it does to your system? So putting that aside, the other issue is the testing. They're suppressing the testing. In January, they announced that they would allow hospitals to stop reporting data to HHS and myself. A lot of disability activists, a lot of doctors online were raising the red flag. This is very bad. They're unwinding testing. It's always bad when they try to bury data. And the only thing the media and the press thought to do was to publish a bunch of articles about how this was misinformation. Because even though it's true that they were getting rid of that metric and they were unwinding that data, there are other sources of data. So the data is redundant. And it's like, well, if you have 2 working brain cells, you understand that as you unwind testing, you don't cancel every single piece of data collection on the same day. You do it slowly behind the scenes. So that's exactly what happened. In February, a lot of the federal requirements were relaxed. Now, I'm in DC. The DC itself was now supposed to be reporting their cases and hospitalizations and deaths daily. They said, oh, we're not going to do that. We'll just do it weekly. We'll give you like a community spread number. We'll do it once a week. It's day 9, no reporting. I have not seen any numbers from DC since April 27th, I think. The wastewater data site, which is supposed to be the last place that you can check to see where cases are in your city, hasn't been updated since April 27th. Now, why is this relevant to vulnerable people? I live in a house with 3 people. One of them plays a live show in a band with no mask every Wednesday. And previously, I had been able to talk him out of performing on nights when cases were high in DC. This week, I have no data to show whether cases are high or low, so he played the show. This is exactly the kind of situations where people are getting forced into unsafe situations. They're getting forced to go to work. They're getting forced to go to school. They're getting forced to be exposed to other people. because we don't even have the data to protect ourselves or make our own health decisions or advocate for ourselves. So at the end of the day, this isn't a policy of choose for yourself. It's a policy of forced infection. We have no choices. We have no data. And Trump never would have gotten away with the amount of just COVID cover-up that's happening right now. I have no way to know what COVID is doing in my city, and neither does anyone else.
Ellie, do you think there's the same level of engagement with COVID in the UK right now, or have people in Europe? We're kind of in a weird numbers are going down, but not as far down as they should, and some people are saying they may be about to come up again. I don't know how you all are off the continent.
So it's a bit different here to the US. So, well, first of all, things are just totally back to normal here.
Things are back to normal here. I was not saying they're not back to normal. I'm saying people are brainwashed as fuck because the death toll is not back to normal. It's just their behavior that's back to normal.
I think I support Britain not shutting down for the simple reason that I think because of the scandals about all of our politicians ignoring lockdown, I think if there was a lockdown here, we would just see mass civil disobedience. I just think people were already growing sick of lockdown. They were growing sick and tired of the pandemic. We were 2 years in, 18 months in, and then two things happened at the same time, which is there was a huge story that it turned out the government had just been breaking all the rules all the time. That was the first thing, and then the second thing was the Omicron was discovered, and there was talk of another lockdown, and I think those two things kind of coalesced in people's minds and just made them kind of very resistant to any kind of restriction. So I think we would see kind of mass civil disobedience in this country if there was another lockdown now, particularly after people are vaccinated. So that's why I'm not in favour of it. I don't think it would be effective. And it's slightly different. The history of COVID is slightly different here because we had a really strict lockdown almost straight away. I mean, we didn't have it soon enough. The government dragged its heels for 2 weeks, which really allowed COVID to spread around. But then we had a really strict lockdown from March until maybe the end of May, quite a long time, maybe even June. That was really strict, and people were not. They weren't even sitting in each other's gardens. They were sort of there was a whole phase where people were not allowed to sit down in a public park alone, and the police would literally come over and move them on. And what that means, and there's also a lot of evidence that these kind of emergency laws that were passed in order to enforce that lockdown have been, of course, been abused by police to sort of be racist, basically, and that a lot of fines were imposed on people that they shouldn't have been. And also that, some people, maybe they had a partner that they'd been with for decades and they weren't allowed to see them in their final moments and say goodbye to them, these kind of things. And what that has meant is that the left in this country has been, very divided. There's been, and then I would say the liberal, the left spectrum, the progressive spectrum. There's some people who are, they really want strict lockdown. They tend to always call for that, whatever the numbers say, whatever the situation is. And those people have exaggerated data a few times, actually. There's a group called Independent Sage, which is Sage is the commission that advises the government on lockdown, and Independent Sage is this independent group of scientists who've come together to kind of provide advice that they feel is less compromised, and some of the stuff they've put out has been a bit dodgy. So there's them, but then there's also this constituency on the left that's quite anti-lockdown because they think that it obscures wider social questions, we need to adapt to COVID by having massive public health investment, by giving people proper sick pay, that kind of thing, by generally making people more healthy, which I agree with, and I agree with, especially in this country, in the sense that the genie is out of the bottle now. We're not going to get rid of COVID in this country. I just don't think that's going to happen. However, that section of the left, I feel, has called things wrong because there's been certain moments where there's been a crunch point, where we know that the line is going to go up. And really, at that point, the government has left it so late that the only viable response to stop the health system collapsing is a lockdown. And that part of the left will still oppose a lockdown, even though, there's not really any other
it's
way,
actually the crisis where the only thing that addresses it is that, right?
Yeah, exactly, because the crisis is too imminent. So basically, so the left is quite divided. It's definitely not as I feel like the American left, from what I can see, is much more unified on the sense that there needs to be restrictions, whereas here, that isn't.
No.
I would say Americans have broadly just given up. Sorry, go ahead,
That's not
Julie.
true. Americans are in denial, and
So I mean the left,
back
sorry.
up also.
Including.
Not even the left. People I know, people who have been very following the science every step of the way, they're just tired of it. But I posit that being tired of it is very much a result of the media landscape that you're in. And if you're in a media landscape that for the last year has told you it's mild now, it's the flu, everyone's going to get it, you're going to be fine, without any discussion of the vaccine resistance, which is getting worse, by the way, and will continue to get worse, without any discussion of the fact that vulnerable people, disabled people, older people are still dying at the same numbers. These numbers haven't changed. 40,000 Americans dead every month forever is not a solution. So whatever the solution is, whether it involves lockdowns or not, what I'm trying to get out there is the actual information of what's happening, because people don't know that information. The first step before we make decisions is for people to understand what's happening. And when you talk to people about Biden, they think that he's done something about the pandemic. He hasn't. That's what the math shows. 40,000 people a month are dying. That's more than a typical flu season, and they're not all older people. So we can't go on like that forever. I'm sorry, lockdowns are maybe unfeasible. Killing 40,000 people every month is not feasible. It's insane. And people just want to bury their head in the sand about it. But there's so many things between lockdown, total lockdown, and doing anything. I mean, what needs to happen during surges, masks indoors. That's the only thing I'm doing. I wear a mask when I'm indoors. When I'm outdoors, I socialize with my friends outside. When I'm indoors, I wear a mask, and I haven't gotten COVID. That's basically the only thing you need to do to significantly cut community spread. But people are just so horrified by this idea, and they also equate it to lockdown. I'm sorry, having to wear a mask indoors in a public space during a pandemic that's killing 40,000 people a month is not a big ask. And if you want to see your friends, sit on the patio that's 5 feet away. I mean, the only situation I can think of where my life has changed significantly is when I want to go drink all night and go to a club and be out late and have my mask off indoor drinking. I can't do that during a surge, although I can do it during the 3/4 of a time that there's not a surge. But if that's your biggest motherfucking priority in life, more so than not letting 40,000 people die a month, go get fucking counseling, because that's just not my biggest priority. I don't give a fuck. Go to your fucking club the next month, because these waves they're pretty short. I mean, they're a month to 6 weeks where there's really, really high risk of exposure. So I would also point out that because of the severe need that people have for this to be over and to pretend that we're in a completely different situation now, people push back on my boundary, which is literally just, I'm going to wear a mask indoors. That's it. I'm still going to see you. I socialize all the time. People want me to be unmasked indoors the same way that Republicans wanted Democrats to be unmasked indoors at the beginning. It's very much this is making me uncomfortable. I don't like that you're doing this. And to me, it's there's something psychological underlying that, where it's I need to prove the pandemic is over, and that can only be done if you stop shoving it in my face that it's not. And even if COVID were just the flu, which it's not, but let's just do a little intellectual experiment. COVID's the flu. When I get the flu, I tend to get sick for 2 to 3 weeks, and it's very miserable. If I had the choice between sitting in a restaurant, and I know there's a really good chance I'm going to get the flu, and sitting 5 feet away on the patio, I know that I'm not going to get the flu, why would it be so hard to understand that I'm going to sit on the patio? That's fucking rational. So people calling everything lockdown, people saying oh my gosh, this is so bad, you're wearing a mask indoors. It's I thought we were going to follow the science. The science fucking says this shit isn't over. And like, if the Biden administration didn't understand that, why are they going out of their way to suppress testing and to suppress data that people can use to protect themselves? Because right now, we don't have reporting in DC. Like I mentioned, it's been 9 days and there's no accountability. No journalists are saying, hey, didn't you guys say you're going to put out this information once a week, even though that was already a bare minimum? I have no idea what's happening in my city. The bare minimum the Biden administration can do for us is give us the information we need to make reasonable choices for ourselves, which was supposed to be, you know, the far right version of how to deal with this anyway. Everyone assesses their own risk. I can't assess my own risk right now. But secondly, if people want to not be responsible for the continuing death of 40,000 people every month, just wear a mask inside. It's not that fucking big a deal.
It's been a public service announcement from the Doubleday Society. No, it's important. It's like, you know, it's just about what we value, because the only thing that I would like, and I've said it to you before, is you're like, it's unsustainable to have 40,000 people die a month. I want to put should. It should be unsustainable, but it's not, either communications-wise, it's not physically. We can handle this psychologically. This amount of death is something that is palatable.
Psychologically,
to Americans,
maybe, but workforce-wise, economy-wise, this is why people are fucking losing their shit and why inflation is off the charts. All of these things are related and they're refusing to connect them. But you can't kill 1 million workers every couple years and have that not affect your economy. Like, obviously. 1 million excess deaths. More than 1 million excess deaths, because we know we're undercounting.
One is reminded of the enclosure movement after the Black Plague in Britain.
It's going to be great for workers. The ones that survive and don't get disabled, it's going to be great. We're, you know, hopefully me, if I'm there, will be commanding a much higher salary. But you're going to see a lot of angry New York Times articles about how horrible it is that workers are asking for stuff.
A bunch of op-eds in the future. Hey, let's do a culture one next time. All right, this was dark. You know, we should do another culture one next time. Let's think about that.
I really love the Yellow Jackets.
Yeah, people responded well to it, actually.
Oh, good.
So what should we watch next?
I wouldn't mind watching. Maybe one thing I would like to watch but haven't got around to yet is The Dropout.
I haven't watched it, and Julie's been pushing me to watch it. So,
is it good?
It's actually okay. Here's the thing. It's not really good.
Oh my God! Save it, Julie. Save your analysis for when we do it on the show.
And Amanda Seyfried is amazing, and. Yeah, so it's worth watching for that. Like, I think it would be like a middle of the road show if it weren't for Amanda Seyfried, and the guy that plays Sonny is also really good, Naveen Andrews.
Yeah, I like him. Yeah, there's loads of posts on Reddit that like of people who were like, there's like advice pages on Reddit. There's loads of posts of people being like, I was interviewed, that are starting to come up now, of like from sort of 10 years ago when people were like, I've been shortlisted for this job for this tech company, but the interview process was really weird and I'm getting a funny vibe. Should I go for it or not? And then like 10 years later, they were like, yeah, that's Theranos. That was Theranos. It's like... Oh
my God. Yes. Okay. That's the plan. We have a plan. This is going to be fun.
Okay, great. Good. Okay. That means, because I've been lobbying Matt to watch it for ages, and now I can say I have to watch it for work. So
yeah, that's how I've been tricking Arun into watching a lot of stuff. He has to watch Independence Day next.
Yes.
Happy post May Day, y'all.
Never seen it.
As a Brit, I have to say I love the bit where the Brits are for some reason in a bunker and they're like, bloody good show, the Yanks got involved.
It's like Colonel Blimp pops out of someplace,
They go out around the world and like half the people are like in huts, like the Americans, they figured it out.
Yeah.
Oh Lord, I'm in for a lot of treats.
It's
I'm in for a lot of treats.
90s.
Committee, comitato, committed, committeto, carul, committee, we young way, submittee, we committee.
يا حلا جلابي عضو القمر شوفي بكاسك إلي وبعتلي خبر عينا بالتوالي تامر وصنوبر والورد ببالي وعشفة في صور